La cosa più importante è che è stato lui a scegliere questi 2 episodi come introduzione alla Masterclass, quindi volevo chiedergli perché ha scelto questi 2 episodi e se li ha mai visti sul grande schermo.
I got help from X-Files fans on the internet. I turned to Twitter and asked them which 2 episodes to show. And there were a lot of suggestions. I think these 2 got the most votes. But I would have picked Memento Mori anyway, because it's my favorite mythology episode. And there's a great story behind how it came to be. It was the hardest and easiest episode we ever wrote. And Milagro is one of my personal favorites. I could have picked a lot of other ones, but it's the most personal episode because it's about being a writer, it's about writing the X-Files.
Ci racconti invece la storia perché l'altro episodio Memento Mori è così invece è stato più difficile episodio da scrivere, che cosa lo rende così speciale?
Well, that was after I'd been writing the X-Files for over 4 years, and I realized that I had spent more time thinking about these fictitious characters than just about anybody in my life. And I realized how obsessed I had become with Mulder and Scully, and not just with writing them, but editing the shows and staring at their faces, studying every aspect of their being. And I thought about the power of that, of fictitious characters. And by that point, the X-Files had become a hit show. And it occurred to me how many fictitious characters had been more important to me than real people. You know, as a child, how fiction, TV, movies, novels, had profoundly affected me. And how in history there were some fictitious characters, you know, like Sherlock Holmes. He might as well have existed. He's been more powerful than a lot of people, more influential than a lot of people, billions of people who did exist. And so, in that episode, you may have seen there's cards on the wall. And that's me. I wrote those cards. That's my handwriting. And that's really the way we would write the X-Files stories, with cards just like that. So it was, and I smiled watching this because it brought back so many memories of writing the show.
Ecco, vorrei fare un passo indietro prima di arrivare agli X-Files. Cosa ti ha spinto verso la scrittura per la televisione? Tu cominci come giornalista e poi che cosa ti ha portato verso la scrittura di serie televisive, ma non solo?
I had always wanted to be in the movie business as a writer or director. But I chickened out. I got to university, to UCLA, and I thought it's just impossible. The odds of succeeding are too small. And at the same time, I had a very inspiring journalism professor. So instead, I turned to journalism. I became editor of my college newspaper, and I worked as a journalist for 7 years, including 2 years in Paris. But after 7 years, I just realized I didn't love it enough to spend the rest of my life doing that. And so I moved back to Los Angeles and I went to film school. And after 2 years, my first job was the X-Files. I was very, very fortunate. And the truth is I really wasn't ready at the beginning. I was very green. There was a lot I didn't understand. But I connected with the show on an emotional level. As a fan would have connected with the show, I got it. And it was exactly what I would have watched as a child if it had been on. And I think Chris Carter, who created the show, saw that in me from the beginning, that I had this insight into the show and ideas and passion for it that I think sustained me until my skills caught up with my passion.
Ora, X-Files non è uno show come tanti, è uno show che ha influenzato le vite, immagino, di molte persone che sono qui e anche di tante che sono fuori. È stato uno degli show più importanti sicuramente degli anni 90, innanzitutto per quello che voi avete creato a livello di narrativa e poi un po' perché X-Files raccoglie l'immaginario collettivo, sono tantissime le storie che voi avete affrontato, basta citare il Golem che è una figura mitologica dell'ebraismo praghese fino ad arrivare a Kennedy. Ecco, come trovavate le storie e che cosa vi guidava verso le storie?
Well, I think Chris Carver created a really beautiful storytelling format. You know, this believer-skeptic dynamic is the perfect way to approach stories of the supernatural. And then the love story that you saw in these 2 episodes, which I think was really subtle at the beginning of the series, and that we came to understand it was really the heart of the series, was the love these 2 characters had for each other. But because it was such a beautiful, simple way to tell stories of the supernatural, you really could tell endless stories through these 2 characters. And I think Chris defined the show really, really well, and then brought very talented people to it who all did their best work through this format, and brought ideas to it that we never would have anticipated. And I think the show became so many things no one imagined. You know, I tell the story in season 2, one of the writers wrote a script that was terrific, but he didn't bother telling anybody that it was a comedy. And when we received the script, everybody was stunned and didn't know what to do, because the X-Files had not been a comedy. But it was so well written that we felt obligated to produce it. And it ended up then being one of the most popular episodes we've ever done. And after that, we did comedy episodes as part of the repertoire. So I think part of the joy of the show was discovering all the things that it could be.
Un altro elemento molto importante è lo sviluppo dei personaggi ricorrenti. Questo è stato qualcosa che ha cambiato in un'era pre-HBO la percezione degli show, cioè il fatto che comunque c'erano dei personaggi che evolvevano anno dopo anno. Come ci avete lavorato? E tra l'altro con un punto di equilibrio molto difficile, perché voi non volevate rivelare troppo della loro storia.
Yes, it was challenging because really Mulder and Scully could not change very much. You needed the believer-skeptic dynamic to drive the stories. And if you watch the show carefully, we did try to vary it and to do unexpected things. And there's an entire season when Mulder sort of loses his faith, if you will. But by accident, it ended up being a show where there were standalone episodes, which, like the second episode, this Milagro episode, that really could have occurred in just about any order. And then I'd say 6 to 8 of the 24 episodes we did every year concerned the mythology, the alien government conspiracy. And that became the storyline where we could change, where we could, you know, Scully's sister would die, and Scully would get cancer, and their personal lives were addressed, particularly in those episodes. But that was a balance we just discovered as we were going. We never planned it that way. It just evolved from the characters and the writers.
Qual era la cosa più difficile per voi quando scrivevate X-Files? Cioè, perché a un certo punto ci sono momenti in cui lo show era così immenso che c'erano grandi aspettative. Come riuscivate a seguire la vostra idea senza cedere troppo alle aspettative del pubblico? Non era anche pre-internet, se vogliamo, quindi forse non c'erano i tweet ogni episodio.
Yes. Yeah, well, we kind of grew up with the internet, if I could just pick up on that point first, because I remember when the show started, you know, it was the computer screens that were black with green text, and there were no graphics at all, and there were Usenet groups, and they would talk about the show. And then by the end of the show in 2002, you know, the internet kind of looks the way it is now, with chat rooms and discussion groups, and so we were getting feedback. I'd say by 1996, I was going on the internet every Friday or Sunday night in America and seeing how people responded to the show. And a lot of the other writers wouldn't do that because it's painful if you to go on the internet and see what people say, and invariably read something hurtful. But I was very curious to see how what we were doing was being received. And it was helpful, especially for the mythology episodes, which are quite difficult to follow. And amazingly, we would plant clues in the mythology episode and then leave it for 2 or 3 years before we come back to it. And I could see by looking at the internet the people, at least the fans who were going online, were following. Like they remember things from 2 or 3 years ago, and this is pre-DVD, pre-iTunes, you know, they were VHS. But most of these viewers are people who were watching that closely, just remembering, which was astonishing to me. But I realized also you can't write to that audience. You have to satisfy that audience, but you've got to write to the general audience that isn't watching as carefully. But I think what kept us going all those years was a sense of competitiveness with ourselves. Always wanting to do better than we had done before. And I know for a fact, Chris Carter and I both felt we wanted to make television that wasn't disposable, television that would last, that people would watch years later, like we watched Twilight Zone. Like people still watch Twilight Zone. And so much of television, especially in the 1990s, people watched it and never saw it again. So for me to be sitting here on the stage with you 20 years after the show premiered is a great thrill, because it's really what we hoped for.
Sì, tra l'altro io ricordo che Frank Spotnitz stasera riceverà l'Excellence Award, perché non solo per quello che lui ha fatto per X-Files, anche l'anno scorso ne abbiamo avuto il suo show Hunted, che è bellissimo, se non avete visto ve lo consiglio, anche se chiaramente è difficile poi staccarsi da aver creato una mitologia. Insomma, X-Files è qualcosa che parte di tutti quanti noi. Però la cosa che mi colpisce, la cosa che mi colpì all'epoca di X-Files era proprio la qualità di quello che voi scrivevate, cioè al di là delle storie, c'è proprio il livello di narrativa innovativo. 20 anni dopo come se lo spiega? Perché eravate un gruppo di persone molto affiatate, ricordo per cui c'era anche Vince Gilligan che adesso è molto famoso per Breaking Bad. È stata una coincidenza, è stato un lavoro, perché quello che colpiva di X-Files, anche se tu non eri forse interessato alla fantascienza, era che ti colpiva la storia, l'atmosfera, il tipo di relazioni che voi andavate a raccontare, soprattutto diciamo, quello che animava questi personaggi.
Well, thank you very much. It's funny because, you know, it really is a police procedural. The show is really, it's about, you know, cops, basically, FBI agents, cops. It just so happens that the cases they're investigating are supernatural. And I think that was why a lot of audiences that wouldn't watch a show like this normally did watch this. They felt the way they were being brought into the stories was something they could understand and relate to. And I think especially Agent Scully and her character, the skeptic, who was really us, and allowed non-science fiction fans to watch the show and enjoy it. But I think our strategy was always to be as smart as possible. And I think that wasn't taken for granted in television in the 1990s. We felt like you couldn't be smart enough. And actually, when I went on the internet, that point of view was vindicated, because I realized how incredibly bright and perceptive the people were that were watching the show. And so we needed to keep ahead of them. And it's not easy to do. I mean, I've been doing this almost 20 years now, and you realize so many smart writers don't write as smart as they themselves are. They tend to make their characters, for whatever reason, less bright than they are. And I always try, even in the minor characters, to make them smarter than I am. Only because it's better drama than, you know, seeing really smart people. And I don't mean necessarily intellectually smart. I just mean they are representing their point of view very effectively. That makes for more interesting and compelling storytelling than people who make foolish choices.
Ecco, quello che, insomma, oltre alle serie televisive ci sono stati 2 film per il cinema tratti da X-Files. Oggi, insomma, si può dire che quei film non fossero così riusciti come le serie. Cosa è successo? Perché poi questa mitologia a un certo punto non è riuscita ad andare avanti? Anche se personalmente, ecco, lo dico io, trovo che tante serie si ispirano più o meno direttamente a X-Files. Penso che chiunque veda Fringe un sospetto di qualche legame, che loro siano i figli, i pronipoti di Monica Skelly. Certo, quando sia uno show molto diverso, molto divertente e anche che porta anche dei presupposti differenti. Ma che cosa è successo a un certo punto? La mitologia non poteva andare oltre, avete capito che col secondo film bisognava finire? ci sta per dire che magari da qui a qualche tempo potremo sperare di sapere cosa succede nel tuo regno?
Oh, I still hope so. I think the first film actually was very successful at the box office. Made a lot of money, and the studio after that film was made between seasons of the TV series, and then we went on for another 4 years on television. And they immediately wanted another movie when the show ended in 2002. But there was a dispute between Chris Carter and the studio. And so from 2002 until 2007, every month or 6 months, I kept thinking I was going to get the call saying, okay, the dispute's been resolved between Chris Carter and the studio, let's make this next movie. And they never stopped being interested in doing the second movie. But Chris and the studio didn't resolve the dispute until 2007, 5 years after the show had ended. And by that point, literally the next day they called. The studio called literally the next day and said, okay, let's do that movie now. But by that point, it had been so long that while they still wanted to make it, they kind of lost faith in the idea of doing the movie. And so the budget they were willing to give us was less than half the budget of the first movie. And they said, don't even try to do aliens. No aliens, it's got to be like a standalone, scary episode. And I think that was a mistake. And I think when they started, I don't know this because they didn't tell me, but this is what, reading between the lines, I think when they started doing the market research after we made the movie, that audiences, especially the movie audiences, they only knew the X-Files for aliens. And they were, where are the aliens? And they were trying to figure out how to market the movie as if it had aliens in it when it didn't have anything because they told us not to. So I think it was the wrong story, and I think we were hurt not just by the scale of the movie, but by the fact that it was a summer movie, believe it or not. I don't know if you saw it. That's all you saw, but it's a very small, dark, kind of melancholy, moody film, and should not have been released in summer. I mean, if anything, it was autumn or winter kind of mood. So I have made that argument to the studio since 2008 that you need to make the alien story and actually finish the X-Files story. It was never ended. I think I still might win that argument, but I think I better win it pretty soon.
Beh, io però credo, ecco, ora, stando che tutti quanti ce lavoriamo un po' come fan, un po' come amanti del cinema, che appunto forse anche il tempo che passa, sperando che non ne passi troppo, insomma, potrebbe essere un elemento molto interessante, perché è interessante capire dove sono questi personaggi tanti anni dopo, perché noi li abbiamo conosciuti in un momento molto particolare della loro vita, forse rincontrarli oggi ha un senso, come ha fatto Dumas con i Tre Moschettieri, 20 anni dopo, insomma, può diventare molto importante. Lei ha già una storia per...
Yes, yeah, Chris Carter and I have known for quite a long time what we want the story to be, and I do think, and I've seen it this year because there's been a lot of celebrating this series being the 20th anniversary. It's one of those things that is now woven into our culture and our collective memories, and so it's very powerful if you can honor those memories. The other thing that I think happened, the last 2 years of the show were pretty controversial, and there are people who love them and people who hate them because of the cast changes, because David Duchovny left on a full-time basis anyway. And it made it difficult to end the show. But I think what's really significant that's not often remarked upon was that 2001, the last season of the show, it premiered right after 9/11. And I think you can't underestimate the devastating impact that had, not just on the United States and the world, but on the X-Files. Because, as you can see from especially the first episode, it's all about paranoia, it's all about distrusting the government, it's all about murky motives. And I really think the X-Files was suddenly profoundly out of step with the mood of the world, but especially the United States. And it was the last thing people wanted to see. And I think now, for better or worse, people are much more in that frame of mind again in 2015.
Ecco, le voglio chiedere una cosa, insomma, questa è una mia lezione personale, quindi non la pongo come sistema, ma credo che appartenga a molte persone in pubblico. Quando si è verificato l'11 settembre, e quando tutta la tragedia davanti ai nostri occhi, era impossibile non pensare agli X-Files. Non per quello che veniva raccontato, ovviamente, per quello che era successo, però, come dire, se in quei 10 anni precedenti all'11 settembre voi aveste raccontato quel mood nei confronti di quello che sarebbe accaduto, cioè fino a quel momento ci raccontavano che Echelon ascoltava le nostre telefonate, che tutto non poteva essere pianificato, e poi quello che è impossibile, quello che nessuno sceneggiatore avrebbe mai portato perché sembrava incredibile, è accaduto. E, ecco, lei, al di là del dolore personale, io non parlo chiaramente di questo, è un fatto personale, non mi permetterei mai di chiederglielo in pubblico, però lei ha pensato, dice, ma non che avevate previsto ovviamente l'11 settembre, ma che l'impossibile si sarebbe verificato, cioè che non c'erano gli alieni, c'era qualcos'altro, però in qualche maniera voi avete accennato nel corso degli anni a quello che è successo in Texas, a Waco, insomma, ai vari... insomma, avevate colto lo spirito di un decennio.
I don't know if it was ever shown in Italy. There was a spin-off of the X-Files called The Lone Gunman.
Yes.
And you may or may not know this, but the first episode of The Lone Gunman has a 767 hijacked from Boston and flown at the World Trade Center, at the towers, with the intent of crashing into them. That was broadcast in March 2011. So for me, I was directing the X-Files on 9/11, and when I woke up and I saw what was happening on the news, I immediately thought of the Lone Gunman. And I actually, my private fear for weeks was that somehow the terrorists had seen that episode and it inspired them. So, which turned out not to be the case, and that they had been planning it for quite some time before that. So the idea that we were on that wavelength occurred to me in a very direct and personal way, and made me sick for some time. But actually then I got sort of angry because I thought if we imagined this, we showed it on television, why wasn't the real world better prepared for something like that, to prevent something like that from happening? But all I can say is that I think the paranoia that you see in the X-Files is a paranoia that I grew up with, and Chris Carter grew up with in America in the 1970s, in the post-Vietnam, post-Watergate era, and it was reflected in so many of the best American movies of the 1970s that we consciously would think about. Movies like 3 Days of the Condor, Parallax View, All the President's Men. These are some of our favorite films and inspired us directly.
Io vorrei fare un'ultima domanda e poi vorrei lasciare la parola al pubblico per le sue domande. Vorrei chiedere, ecco, lei...
Si considera pubblico?
Non so come la dovrei considerare.
Sono colleghi?
Siamo tutti giornalisti in questa sala?
Più o meno.
Dice?
No, è una masterclass, è aperta a tutti.
No, non lo so, no, visto che non mi ha corretto, volevo chiedere, no, non lo so, poi mi fa parlare, no? Cioè, una notazione specifica. Volevo chiedere, lei crede che, insomma, lei ha continuato la sua carriera, continua a scrivere degli show bellissimi, ripeto, Hunted e poi altre cose. Ecco, quanto è difficile staccarsi da essere, quando uno crea una mitologia, staccarsi da questa mitologia?
Well, it's funny because I'm not a conspiracy theorist in real life. We were talking about this at dinner last night. I'm very skeptical, but I do love them in fiction because they illuminate ideas. And I think one of the joys for me about doing the X-Files, and I only realized this later after the show was over, was that the X-Files, every episode was always about something. There was always an idea. If you're going to tell a story that's not about literal reality as we all know it, if you're going to depart from it by creating aliens or monsters or supernatural phenomena, there better be a good reason. You better have something you're saying. Otherwise, it's just going to be silly. People are going to laugh at it. But I think to the degree you're ever affected by a story of this kind, and I think this is why this genre attracts such smart audiences and such devotion among audiences, is because it's telling you something about humanity. It's an exaggeration about something in the world that you feel is true. As a writer, you feel it's true, and that's why you invented this. I mean, I could talk about the monster of Milagro, that means a lot to me. There's ideas in that I really feel deeply about. So when I create a mythology, whether it's for the X-Files or for Hunted, it's an idea that I really care about, very profoundly, and that I really want to share with other people. And one of the things I learned from doing the X-Files was, as a writer, as an artist, as somebody trying to create something, your ambition has to be so great. You have to be aiming so high to achieve such an incredible level of success because if you don't aim that high, you will land so low. I aim this high, and then if I'm lucky, I land here. And if I aim this high to start out with, then it would be terrible. So I always try to engage my head and my heart, and make sure that what I'm saying, what I'm trying to communicate, I care about so deeply, so that there's a chance that you might care about it as well.
Sì, alzate la mano, c'è una mano lì alzata, possiamo portare un microfono lì? Grazie. Nel frattempo volevo chiedere a Frank, ieri lui ha detto anche un'altra cosa che ho trovato più geniale, qualcosa che tipo la cospirazione della stupidità, cioè che a un certo punto lei crede che a volte delle cose che accadono non c'è una teoria del complotto, ma c'è una cospirazione di stupidità messe insieme, che è un po' un'idea del cinema dei fratelli Coen a livello globale, a livello...
Yes, my skepticism about conspiracy theories is they usually depend on people being brilliant, pulling off this amazing con job on the public, like there's no moon landing. I just don't believe people are that competent that they could execute these amazing plans. I believe that there are conspiracies that are the result of incompetence. People are covering things up. I do believe that happens all the time. But it's the conspiracies that are these master plans where we can pull one over on the whole world that I find incredible. The other thing that I often think about is that so many of the most traumatic things that happen in the world just seem so unfair, and they seem so impossible. Like, how could the President of the United States be shot by one guy with a rifle? It can't be. And so the crime is so disproportionate to the criminal that you crave a more satisfying explanation. Well, no, there's a world conspiracy that involves, the Soviets and LBJ, and oh, that's much better. It matches the magnitude of the injustice. I think it's very hard for us to accept the truth.
Prego. C'è una domanda lì, dov'era la domanda? Qualcuno ha alzato la mano, scusa.
Well, I wasn't often on the set, actually, because when you're writing and producing, that's the last thing you do. The worst day, without a doubt, was on the and we didn't shoot that day, but we returned the next day, and everybody was just in a state of shock. So that was very difficult. The best day was actually, I would say, the premiere of the first movie, because the studio had rented a van, and Chris and I were taken around to all the movie theaters in Los Angeles. And we literally would walk into each theater, stand at the back for a few minutes, and then leave. And then go to the next theater, stand at the back. And it was sold out everywhere. And as a television writer, this isn't something you get to see. You don't get to go into people's homes and watch them watch it. So we were going from movie theater to movie theater. And invariably we arrived at the moment in the hallway where Mulder and Scully are about to kiss. Right? And then there's the bee sting that prevents the kiss. Yeah. So they took us to the Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, which is world famous and an enormous, I don't know how many people it seats, thousands of people. And I didn't know there's a secret room at the back of that theater, which, maybe all the old movie moguls used to go and stand in the back in this very room. Secret room seats maybe 6 people. And so they took us back there, and that moment comes when Mulder almost kisses Scully and doesn't because of the bee sting. and 5,000 people screamed at the screen. And I thought, it can't get any better than this. It never really did. I mean, that was the highlight for me.
Prego.
Sì, certo, ok. Se ho l'autorizzazione del moderatore faccio una piccola premessa personale. Lo show...
troppo lunga.
No, dai, accorcio il più velocemente possibile. Lo show funzionava benissimo. Io purtroppo non l'ho visto tutto, ho visto soprattutto le stagioni centrali, in primo luogo perché le prime stagioni facevano troppa paura per la bambina che ero, e anche poi in seguito in realtà l'atmosfera era molto funzionale. Mio padre ancora ride ricordando che lo costringevo a guardare X-Files con me perché non avevo il coraggio di guardarlo da sola, però poi alla fine lo guardavo. Quindi così era giusto per un ricordo che ho avuto della mia infanzia. Quello che volevo sapere è che lei ha detto che lo show è fondamentalmente nato come un poliziesco procedurale alla fine, con delle storie un po' fuori dall'ordinario. Da dov'è che prendevate a livello di scrittura l'ispirazione per queste storie? Perché a parte tutte le varie mitologie appunto riguardanti criptozoologia, criptoarcheologia, cioè tutto quello che ha cripto davanti fondamentalmente, ci sono state anche magari, non so, delle storie di comune delitti che avete detto, beh, questa qui la potremmo anche rivedere in una chiave un po' diversa, insomma, da dov'è che traevate la maggiore ispirazione? Se da giornali scandalistici che raccontavano storie assurde o se proprio dalla cronaca effettiva dei quotidiani? Grazie.
The inspiration came from all of those things, from newspapers. I read a cookbook once. I got an idea for an episode. Documentaries, old movies. But I think the idea for the series, Chris Carter realized at that point in 1992 that there was nothing scary on television. And there was a TV movie in the United States in the early 70s called Night Stalker that was absolutely terrifying, and it was the highest rated TV movie of all time when it was broadcast. And he wanted to do something as scary as that for television. And I think we never forgot that our job was to scare people. And that was the fun part to me about doing the X-Files was, on the one hand, we have all these very grandiose ideas in our heads about what the show means and why we're telling the stories. On the other hand, it's very low culture. It's just, pulling people's throbbing hearts out of their chests and making you go, ooh. We actually would call these moments in the writer's room boos. It's like, boo. There's another boo moment. And we needed a certain number of boos per episode to make it successful. So I think the greatest inspiration simply was deadlines. We just had to come up with ideas, and it's amazing what you can do when you have to.
Ecco, abbiamo delle domande, una domanda qui.
Hanno visto nel vostro lavoro una opportunità anche per crescere in maniera mentale. Io sono un sacerdote cattolico e guardavo X-Files di nascosto, a notte fonda, di nascosto dai miei superiori, perché non volevano che guardassi il programma. Non perché avessero qualcosa contro X-Files, ma gli orari, non erano d'accordo con gli orari, allora, però io di nascosto di notte andavo e non mi perdevo neanche una puntata. Non avete anticipato solamente evoluzioni di tipo sociologico o eventi mondiali. Penso che abbiate anche risvegliato un concetto, permettetemi, filosofico, antropologico. Proprio una settimana fa il Papa ha detto che la verità è relazione. E penso che alla fine questo sia stato uno dei più grandi successi di X-Files, farci capire che la verità alla fine era una relazione fra Mulder e Scully, relazione fra loro e quello che stavano affrontando. In questo senso, forse non so se tutti sono d'accordo, ma io credo che I Want to Believe, il film, secondo me, sia un gioiello, non sia assolutamente inferiore a tutta la serie. ovviamente, come tutti spero, in un terzo film, e credo che la mitologia possa dare molto ancora, però credo anche che un esempio come I Want to Believe sia una perfetta sintesi di ciò che avete dato con X-Files in tanti anni. La verità è una relazione, è un incontro, e ancora grazie per questo.
I didn't know the Pope had said that, but he said that. But I think that is what the X-Files says. Because Mulder's always talking about the truth. They talked about the truth in these episodes, and really the truth is right there in front of them. It's the only truth we as humans can know, I think. So, thank you.
Abbiamo una domanda lì.
Allora, anch'io parto con i ringraziamenti, intanto perché stavo sui primi numeri della rivista X-File, in italiano fui pagato così tanto all'epoca che neanche adesso ancora me li sogno quei soldi. Detto ciò, una cosa fondamentale è che X-File è il primo che ha introdotto, lei parla molto di film, ma in realtà vediamo in TV una cosa cinematografica, cioè quello che adesso diciamo tutti quanti, i telefilm sono di qualità cinematografica, X-File praticamente ha aperto la strada a tutto, come dice giustamente il nostro moderatore, un pre-HBO che ha letteralmente aperto la strada, ha fatto capire forse anche lì diciamo Hollywood, dove magari non capiscono molte cose, secondo me, che c'era la possibilità di fare un prodotto di qualità che il pubblico ovviamente apprezzava, di qualità cinematografica, in questo caso avrei detto più a Vancouver, visto che c'eravate là. E l'ultima cosa, grazie per la cosa per i complotti, visto che io sono per anni per via di una tesi, ho seguito tutta la storia dei complotti 11 settembre per finire in questa sala, e però prosegue comunque all'infinito, però è vero, la gente, come dice lei, sono delle persone molto particolari.
Non riesce a tradurre.
Well, I think we benefited because we were telling stories of suspense and scare. They needed to be visual, and then we had a number of really fabulous directors, but two in particular, and not by coincidence, the episodes were the ones I showed today. The first directed by Rob Bowman and the other by Kim Manners, who competed with each other to make the show visually more sophisticated. And they were producers on the show and directed 2/3 of the episodes for a 3-year period. So if you watch The X-Files, we would go back and look at it season 1. I mean, it was a very good show, season 1, but visually, from season 2 to season 4, it's incredible what happens to the show in terms of the cinematic quality of it and the way the camera is used to tell the story in a very powerful way. And I largely credit the competition between those two guys directing each other. And then once the show got that sophisticated, of course, it never went back.
Abbiamo domande? Io volevo chiedere se è in contatto ancora costante con gli attori dello show, sia i protagonisti sia...
Yeah, I can't say that I speak to David and Gillian regularly, but actually Gillian originally was going to be the star of Hunted. It was actually developed with her and for her, but it took so long to get the green light that when we finally got it, she couldn't do it. But she lives in London. David, maybe once a year, but Chris Carter all the time, Vince Gilligan all the time, and then the other writers, from time to time, but Chris and that's I speak to constantly.
Abbiamo domande? Prego, adesso le arriverà il microfono.
Volevo chiedere una cosa, prima ha detto che hai cominciato facendo il giornalista, dopo hai deciso che volevi scrivere sceneggiature, però inizialmente dovevano essere sceneggiature di film, discorso a parte di X-Files che ha dato il successo incredibile e poi comunque ha dato anche l'opportunità di scrivere la sceneggiatura di 2 film. Volevo sapere se c'era qualche rimpianto di non aver perseguito quella strada, la strada appunto di Hollywood, invece hai perseguito questa strada che comunque ha dato tantissimo.
Well, it's funny because I grew up loving both movies and television, but there's something about the form of the movie that I think is so perfect and beautiful that in 2 hours you have a whole world, you can take in the whole idea and it's gone. But the movie business, I hate. I mean, it's a terrible business, and we lucked X-Files because, you know, it's sort of cheating. It's like, well, you're the X-Files, so you just come in the front door of the movie business. But normally, and I've continued to write screenplays as sort of a hobby on the side to my TV career. But it's a very dysfunctional political business. It's a terrible, heartbreaking thing for writers who make a lot of money, by the way, but they're miserably unhappy because the process of making movies is really broken. And I think it shows in the movies that Hollywood is making these days. Television, on the other hand, has never been better. It was getting better and better in the 90s, and I think today it's better than ever. It's more sophisticated, more interesting, more ambitious, more experimental. So it's a fabulous place to be. And my problem now is just that there are more stories, more series I'd like to do than I have time or ability. I wish I could work faster. I wish I could split myself into and do more. But I'm trying to do a lot of things. Prego.
Io volevo sapere se c'era qualche momento particolare nella realizzazione di X-Files in tutti questi anni che lei ricorda con particolare emozione e voleva condividere con noi, magari.
Oh boy. You know, most of the moments are moments writing, working with Chris and the other writers, and they were high stress. It was really high pressure, not fun most of the time, and it was 8 years of my life, and incredibly important 8 years of my life. There were moments that, of course, you never forget because they're the first. Like the first time I was on the set, it was my first episode, and it was a scene where David was supposed to cry. It was scripted that he cry, and he said to the director, Rob Bowman, you know that scene? And he didn't know who I was, so I was just standing there, listening to talk to Rob Bowman. That scene says I'm going to cry. I don't want to cry. I'm like, oh great, this is my first script. This is a big scene. He's not going to cry. And what he did was he fought crying. He tried not to cry. He didn't want to show his face to the camera. And it was better than what I imagined. And I realized that's the joy of collaboration. When somebody you're collaborating with makes it better, you know, improves your vision for it. And that happened again and again and again in the X-Files. Having said that, I think it happens so often because we work so hard. When the scripts are good, everybody else can do their best work. The actors will be inspired, the director, the composer, everybody. And when the scripts aren't good, everybody goes off in different directions. And there are a few episodes of the X-Files where I think we did that, but to an extraordinarily large degree, we fulfilled our promise.
Abbiamo altre domande?
Il giornalista ha influenzato l'altro lavoro di sceneggiatore?
Well, I think actually being a journalist was fantastic training. I didn't intend it this way. And Chris Carter had been a surfing journalist, different kind of journalist, but he too felt this, that being a reporter, you're forced to go out and see a lot of the world, talk to a lot of different people. So I saw a lot in those 7 years. I covered a lot of different types of stories. And you need to synthesize information very quickly. I wrote for wire services, which in the pre-internet age, you were deadline driven. You had to quickly go back to the office, type it up, and send it out. And you had to write clearly and concisely. And literally, you had to have the most important information first, and then the next, and so on. So it was great training for thinking clearly and doing research and things that were directly relevant to doing the X-Files. So I think it's actually, it's a very good career path. And there are a number of journalists besides me who've done it. People like David Simon.
Volevo chiedere come appunto nella sua esperienza oggi quando guarda la televisione riconosce la vostra influenza, l'influenza di Simon sull'approccio, perché quando uno scrive una serie di culto che in qualche maniera tocca le vite delle persone, poi in qualche maniera o nell'altra poi questa serie non muore mai, non solo per la televisione, per i reruns, ma qualche cosa che la influenza dalle suonerie del cellulare fino ad arrivare non so, a citazioni che continuamente vediamo fare nei media, anche ovviamente fuori dall'entertainment.
Well, thank you. I hope that's true. I don't. I mean, I think when I was doing the X-Files, I was very aware of how much I was taking from other people. You know, how much I was inspired by the movies, the TV shows, the books that I loved. You know, and some of them you'd be very surprised, like the things that influence the X-Files that have nothing to do with it directly. And I think all of us share this cultural soup and draw from it what we can. And so, you know, if the X-Files has proved to be something useful to other people, I think that's fabulous. I'm just aware of how much television has changed in the last 20 years. And, you know, the X-Files, I would like to think it was, you know, ambitious in every way, visually, in terms of the storytelling, the ideas, the characters, and all those things. But it existed in the era of network television. And, you know, you could watch the X-Files and the next day you go to school or you go to work and people had seen it too, and you could share that conversation, which I really liked. And I think what's happened now is that there's fabulous television, better than ever, amazing stuff, but it's reaching smaller audiences, it's all fragmented, and people are watching it at different times. You know, and so you'll have somebody say, don't tell me, I'm only since season 1 of Mad Men, or, you know, I haven't even started watching The Wire yet, or I've just watched Breaking Bad. We're all dispersed in a way, which I guess is worth it because it's resulted in some incredibly interesting television. But I do miss that shared conversation.
Abbiamo tempo ancora per un paio di domande, poi chiuderemo questa masterclass anche per
Gilligan. Volevo capire un po' qual è stato il loro rapporto all'interno di X-Files. E poi se per curiosità, visto che insomma si è conclusa ieri, se ha mai visto Breaking Bad e quale pensi sia stato il suo punto di forza, perché anche quello è diventato un cult per il pubblico. Grazie.
Yeah, Vince is one of my dearest friends in Hollywood. It's funny, you work in Hollywood, you don't actually make that many friends. So you make a lot of sort of work friends, but people who actually are your friends over the years, and we've known each other for almost 20 years now. And we tried to work together for years after the X-Files. I did a show with Michael Mann, and Vince wrote for that, and I did a remake of Night Stalker, and Vince wrote for that, and we did a pilot together that didn't go to series. And then finally, he went off to do Breaking Bad, and the rest is history. And I think it's one of the great shows ever. I think it's one of the best shows ever made, one of the great achievements, and it's squarely due to him, his talent. And I'm happy to say, like, it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. He's genuinely, like, he seems like such a genuine guy when you see an interview, and he is. But I watched the finale this morning, actually, in my hotel room, and I didn't see it right away. I thought it was just perfect.
Non ci racconti come no, però mi sembra di capire che lei dovevi girare un episodio, dovevi dirigere un episodio o 2 di Breaking Bad e poi non è successo. No, because you were supposed to direct one episode of Breaking Bad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he, season 1 of Breaking Bad, he'd asked me to direct an episode, which I obviously would have been thrilled to do, and then the X-Files movie got moved in. And so because of I Want to Believe, I couldn't do Breaking Bad, so, you know, that's the way it goes.
Bene, io vorrei concludere questa masterclass con una nota di grande orgoglio, anche se forse un po' così. Io, insomma, Frank Spotnitz mi ha annunciato di avere preso anche la cittadinanza italiana una settimana fa.
Yes, I do.
Quindi gli X-Files sono un po' italiani da qualche settimana. Allora voglio chiedere se, anche se la politica italiana è forse più difficile degli X-Files, anzi forse a livello dilettantistico rispetto agli X-Files, però una storia, visto che lei è a tutti gli effetti un nostro connazionale, una storia d'ambientalità, non degli X-Files, cioè uno show d'ambientalità ce l'avrebbe?
I have been thinking about it. First of all, I'm extremely proud and humbled. It's true, I became a citizen on Thursday. I sworn in, I raised my hand to be an Italian citizen. My wife is Italian-American. She recovered her Italian citizenship 2 years ago, along with my children. So I was the only one in the family who didn't have it. And our goal for the next year is to actually learn to speak the language. So if you ever have me back, I hope I can do this in Italian. I don't want to hurt your ears. But,
we can try every year to see how proficient you are.
I have to say, I talk to people here, and I've been to Italy. I've been living in London for 3 years. I've probably been to Italy a dozen times in the past 3 years. And the Italian people I talk to, you know, are pained about various things, economic problems or political problems, but you know, you don't need me to tell you this, that the whole world loves your country and admires your country and dreams about coming to your country. You may feel like beset by all these problems, but there is a greatness to Italy that everybody else, every country I've ever been to, recognizes and has enormous affection for. So I hope when you're feeling depressed about one of these other things, you won't forget that.
Bene, non c'è una nota migliore su cui potevamo concludere questa masterclass. Io ringrazio Frank Spotnitz per il suo lavoro, per tutto quello che ha fatto, e vi do appuntamento stasera quando riceverà il premio della Sala Simone. Grazie.